Okay, today we're going to talk about measures of central tendency. The definition for measures of central tendency are numbers that describe the center of the data, and the most common measures of central tendency are mean, median, and mode. So today we're going to talk about how to find mean, median, mode, and also range. So the first measure of central tendency we're going to look at is mean. I'll zoom in here a little bit. The mean is the value that represents an even distribution of the data. We also know this as average. So how do we find the mean? We're going to add the data and divide by the number of items in the set. If you need to pause and write these things down, that's okay. So let's do an example. We have a set of numbers, 22, 18, 20, and 12. And we want to find the mean. So we're going to add all of these numbers. So 22 plus 18 plus 20 plus 12 equals 72. The next step is to divide by the number of items in the data set. So we're going to take 72 and divide by 4 because there are 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers in the data set. 72 divided by 4 is 18, so our mean is 18. Now, one thing that we're going to talk about tomorrow in more depth is when it's most appropriate to use mean, median, or mode, or range. The mean, the best representation when we want to use mean is when the data does not have an outlier, and we'll define outlier in just a minute, or when you're measuring the central tendency of the data. We might want to consider another representation when the data has an outlier or when the data is clustered around the high or low end of the set. So that is mean. Another measure of central tendency is mode. The definition of mode is the value that occurs most often than any other value. Now here's an important point. There may be no mode, one mode, or more than one mode for a set of data. So how do we find the mode? We're going to look for the number that occurs most often. So for example, we have a data set 15, 20, 20, 22, and 26. Because 20 occurs most often, that is our mode. And remember, you can have no mode, one mode, or more than one mode. So again, tomorrow we'll deal with this in more depth. But the best representation for mode is when you're determining the most popular response or when you're analyzing categorical data. You might want to consider another representation when there is no mode or when there is more than one mode. So again, on the best representations, we will be talking about this more in depth tomorrow. Now, when we spoke of mean, we talked about outliers. Here's the definition for outlier. It is a number in a set of data that is much smaller or larger than most of the numbers in the set and affecting the distribution of data. We call that an outlier. Now, another measure of central tendency is median. The median is the value that is found in the middle of the data when the data is arranged in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. So how do we find the median? We're going to order the numbers from least to greatest, find the middle number. If there is no middle number, you will find the mean of the two middle numbers. So if you need to pause to write that down, that's okay. Now, here's an example. we have the numbers 12, 18, 20, and 22. There's an even number of numbers in our data set, so we have no middle number. So we're going to take the mean of the two middle numbers, which is 18 and 20. So using the rules we used for mean, we're going to add 18 plus 20 because those are our two middle numbers. We'll add 18 and 20, which is 38, and then divide by 2 since there are two numbers. So our median is 19. So when are we going to use median to describe data? We would use median when the data has an outlier, when the data is not evenly distributed, when measuring the central tendency of the data. You might want to consider a different representation when asked to determine the average. So again, we'll go into more depth on when it's most appropriate to use mean, median, or mode. The last thing we're going to talk about is range. Now notice that range is outlined in orange, and we did not include the word range when we were talking about measures of central tendency. Range is not a measure of central tendency, but we can use range to describe a set of data. So the range is the difference between the largest and smallest values in a set of data. How do we find that? We subtract the least number from the greatest number. So our example is 12, 18, 20, 22. Notice that they're ordered from least to greatest, so we can easily find the least number and the greatest number and subtract. So we subtract 12 from 22, we get 10. That is our range. We want to use range when we are determining the spread of the data or when we're considering if a set of data has an outlier. We might want to consider a different representation when the data has an outlier. So these are the definitions and the how-to for mean, median, mode, and range. Notice mean, mode, and median are all highlighted with blue, and range is highlighted in orange because mean, median, and mode are all measures of central tendency and range is not, but they can all be used to describe a set of data. The last thing we're going to do is practice, and I want you to do this on your own to make sure you understand it, and you can come to class tomorrow with questions. Okay, here is a set of data that represents the number of minutes spent on cell phones in one day, and you want to find the mean, median, mode, and range of each set of data. Okay, so tomorrow you will need to have these worked out. Remember, look back at the notes that we just talked about. If you have any questions, you can ask tomorrow.